I had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. My dad's farm, just me, the fields, the smell of hay, maybe a tractor ride if I was lucky. Simple, peaceful, perfect. I imagine rolling past the familiar gravel road, the sun hitting the barn just right, a couple of cows wandering lazily in the distance. I thought finally some peace. But the second I turned onto the road, my stomach dropped. There they were, two men staring like hawks, only less charming, official-looking vests, radios buzzing, clipboards held like shields. And they weren't moving, not a step, just standing there blocking my path. I slowed the truck, craning my neck. Hello, I called out. One of them didn't even blink. The other adjusted his sunglasses and said flatly, "You can't go any further." I laughed nervously. Okay, maybe they're just confused. I rolled down the window. I live here, or well, my dad owns this farm. I'm just visiting. He didn't flinch. You're banned. I froze. Banned? My dad's farm? I felt like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where my childhood memories were suddenly considered contraband. Excuse me? I asked, hoping maybe I misheard. You heard me. You can't come in. Now most people might panic. Me? I went straight for sarcasm. Oh wow, did I miss the memo about your new HOA farm security force? Should I have brought my birth certificate or maybe a notarized permission slip from Dad? He didn't laugh. Figures. I got out of the truck, better to show I wasn't some reckless troublemaker, right? But as soon as my boots hit the gravel, I realized they weren't planning to budge. One of them stepped forward, crossing his arms. He looked like he had been waiting his whole life for someone exactly like me. So why am I banned? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I wanted to sound calm, reasonable, approachable. Instead, it probably sounded like a mix between confused tourist and frustrated, exasperated teenager. That's not your concern, he said, clipboard in hand. You need to leave. I blinked, I stared. I swear a bird flew past just to laugh at me. You know, technically I own nothing here, but last I checked, my dad does. And somehow he never mentioned a banned family member clause in his will. The other guard didn't answer, he just stared at me. I could feel his eyes drilling through my soul. I tried to keep my cool, but my stomach was doing backflips. Something was very wrong. I considered just turning around, pretending I was lost and leaving. But no, there's a fine line between avoiding a problem and letting it stomp all over your childhood memories. I wasn't going to back down. I glanced past them, hoping for a friendly neighbor, a witness, someone who could make this less absurd. Nothing. The farm lay behind them, quiet and undisturbed, like a scene from a postcard. And yet here I was, stopped cold by two strangers who apparently had the authority to decide if I could exist on my dad's property. My mind started racing. Is this some new HOA rule, some private security nonsense? Or are they just enjoying the thrill of yelling at someone for fun? I leaned back against my truck, trying to think. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe there was a notice somewhere I hadn't seen. But something told me I wasn't going to find clarity in paperwork. No, this was going to be about nerves, about stubbornness, about one side refusing to budge and me refusing to leave. I took a deep breath and said louder this time, "Listen, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not leaving until I get some answers. I'm not asking, I'm telling." The two guards exchanged a look. I think one of them actually sighed. It was then I realized I wasn't dealing with logic. I was dealing with ritual, a standoff, my peaceful weekend, already a hostage situation. And in that moment, as I gripped the steering wheel and stared down my own personal security blockade, I knew this weekend was going to be a lot more interesting than I had ever imagined. I figured talking calmly would work. I mean, how hard could it be? I've lived on this farm my whole life. I know every tree, every fence post, every pothole in the driveway. Surely that counted for something. I stepped closer, trying to appear confident, even though my heart was doing some Olympic gymnastics in my chest. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need you to explain something. Why exactly am I banned from my dad's property?" The first guard lifted a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You're not allowed here, that's all you need to know." I blinked. That's it? No warning, no explanation, just a blanket ban? I tried again. "I don't think you understand. This is my dad's farm. Literally every inch belongs to him. And somehow you've decided I'm persona non grata? Can you tell me why?" He looked at me like I'd asked him to solve world hunger on the spot. The other guard adjusted his sunglasses and crossed his arms like he'd done this 1,000 times before. And judging by the smugness on his face, he had. I groaned. Of course he has. I decided to inject a little humor, hopping to break the tension. Do I need to present a notarized certificate proving I'm his kid? Maybe get a DNA test while we're at it? No reaction, not a silence, not even a twitch. My patience was running thin. I could feel the adrenaline turning into heat in my face. My dad would be furious if he knew I was being blocked like some criminal, but part of me also had to laugh. How ridiculous could this possibly get? Two grown men, acting like they were running the Department of Farm Security, standing in front of me while I tried to get onto property I practically grew up on. I glanced at the truck behind me. I could always just leave, but that wasn't me. Backing down wasn't my style, not when the absurdity of the situation demanded confrontation. So let me get this straight, I said, stepping even closer. I can't go onto my dad's farm, you won't tell me why, and you think this is normal? I raised an eyebrow. You do realize I know where the hidden gates, the barn, the creek, all of it is, right? This isn't going to intimidate me. The guards exchanged a look, a twitch of doubt maybe, but the first one shook his head. Rules are rules. I let out a slow, sarcastic laugh. Rules on my dad's land? I shook my head. You've got to be kidding me. One of them opened his mouth, probably to repeat the same line, but stopped. The other one stepped forward, trying to assert dominance, and muttered something about calling higher authority. I had to stifle a laugh. Higher authority on a farm? I glanced at the fields behind them. The cows looked at me like I was insane, and honestly, I was starting to feel like I might be. Still, something in me refused to back down. I squared my shoulders. Look, I don't care how many walkie-talkies you have, or what your boss says, or what the HOA thinks. I'm not leaving until someone explains this to me. The guard's gaze flickered toward the driveway again, like he suddenly realized this wasn't going to be easy. And maybe, just maybe, he noticed I wasn't alone. I called out louder this time. Does my dad know about this? Maybe I should call him. That got their attention. They stiffened. I could see it, the first hint of panic in their otherwise stoic faces. They hated this. They hated the idea that authority could be questioned. I fished my phone out of my pocket. Hi, Dad. Yeah, I'm at the farm. No, it's not peaceful. Two guards won't let me in. Yes, really, can you come here? I watched their reactions carefully. The one with the clipboard glanced around nervously. The other whispered something into his radio, and suddenly this little standoff felt a lot bigger than just me. My heart pounded, but I forced a grin. Humor had to be my shield. You know, I said, stepping even closer, if this is some kind of new HOA farm security training, I'm happy to volunteer. I promise I'll be scary and intimidating, but maybe, just maybe, let me onto the property first. Neither of them moved. I could feel the tension stretching like a rope ready to snap. My dad was on his way, and for the first time, I felt the flicker of hope that this ridiculous standoff might actually be broken one way or another. But even as I dialed his number again, a thought hit me. These guys aren't going to back down easily. This weekend just got a lot more complicated. And that's when I realized, whatever happened next, I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was about to fight for every memory, every corner of my childhood, and maybe even my sanity. I paced in front of the truck, phone clutched in my hand, waiting for my dad. Each second felt like a lifetime. I tried to peer past the guards, but they were like statues blocking the road, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding every emotion. My stomach twisted in knots, part fear, part disbelief. How did this even happen? I thought. My dad had lived on this land for decades. I'd spent summers chasing chickens, fixing fences, learning to drive the old tractor, and now, suddenly, I was a criminal in my own story. I tried reasoning again. Look, I said, holding up my hands. I get it if there's some misunderstanding. I'm happy to talk, to show ID, proof that I'm my dad's kid, even a signed permission slip from him if you need. The guard with the clipboard just stared, like I'd grown another head. The other one shifted, muttered something into his radio, and shot me a glare that could probably strip paint. I sighed, realizing this wasn't going to be solved by logic or charm. Humor had helped, yes, but it wasn't enough. And now I had to think bigger. I needed answers. I decided to check for clues. Maybe there was some sign, some notice, some official-looking paper stapled to a fence that would explain this madness. I walked around the perimeter, my boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning every inch. And that's when I saw it, a small yellow sign pinned to a post, almost hidden behind a bush. HOA rules I'd never seen before. Rules that claimed certain unauthorized individuals could be denied access with penalties for trespassing. I stared at it, incredulous. Unauthorized individuals, I live here, I breathe here, the cows know me. I laughed bitterly, half to myself, half at the absurdity. This has to be a joke, I muttered. The cows snorted, maybe agreeing, maybe just chewing cud. Either way, I felt a little less alone. Still, the guards didn't budge, and that's when a new thought hit me. Maybe I needed backup. I pulled my phone out again and called my dad. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady though my fingers shook. Yeah, hi, so small problem, big problem actually. The HOA, no, seriously, they've banned me from your farm. No, I'm not joking. Please tell me you see the absurdity here. There was a pause, then laughter. My dad's voice came through low and amused. You're banned on my farm, really? Really? I said, throwing my hands up. Two guards, sunglasses, radios, clipboards, they think they're law enforcement. My dad chuckled. Well, you technically didn't own the property, so I guess technically they could argue it. But really? This is ridiculous. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Hearing his voice calmed me slightly, but the tension didn't leave. The guards watched me like I'd just summoned a hurricane. I could tell they were uncomfortable with my calm persistence. While waiting, I took stock. Maybe there was a way through without confrontation. A side gate, a creek crossing, a trick of the terrain only a local would know. Every instinct I had screamed that there was some path, some loophole in their armor of authority. Then I noticed the neighbor across the street, watching quietly from their porch. They waved awkwardly, probably unsure if they should intervene or just grab popcorn. I grinned, muttering to myself, yeah, thanks for the moral support, Mrs. Thompson. Really helps against two men who act like they own the place. A few minutes later, my dad's truck rumbled down the road. I could hear it before I saw it. My heart lifted. Seeing him get out calm but clearly amused gave me hope. Finally, reinforcements. He walked over, hands in his pockets, looking every bit like he owned the place, which of course he did. So let me get this straight, he said, smiling at the guards. You're refusing my kid entry onto my property. One guard stiffened, the other adjusted his sunglasses, trying to assert authority. It's protocol, one said. My dad raised an eyebrow, glancing at me. Protocol, huh? Care to explain how that makes sense on land I legally own? They hesitated. I could see them realizing, finally, that this wasn't going to be as simple as barking orders at a random visitor. I felt a surge of hope, but I didn't let my guard down. I'd learned the hard way that the HOA guards weren't going to give up without a fight. I glanced at my dad, silently asking, okay, what's the plan? He smirked, oh, we've got a plan. And that's when I realized the next few minutes were going to decide everything. The weekend I'd imagined as peaceful, quiet, and simple was about to become one of the most ridiculous, suspense-filled adventures of my life. My dad arrived like a calm storm, boots crunching on gravel, hands in his pockets, surveying the scene as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. He looked at me, smirked, and said, so these are the champions of farm security, huh? I shot him a look that said exactly. The two guards straightened immediately, posture stiffening as though my dad's arrival had somehow leveled up the intimidation factor. One of them cleared his throat. Sir, we're just following protocol. Protocol, again, that word had officially lost all meaning in my book. Protocol, I muttered under my breath, the universal excuse for nonsense. Dad chuckled. Well, I'm going to need you to explain these protocols to me, because last I checked, my kid and I are authorized individuals on my property. The guards exchanged a glance. Their rigid confidence wavered for the first time, and I had to suppress a grin. This was the opening we needed. I decided to test their rules, see how far the absurdity stretched. You know, I said, stepping forward slowly, maybe there's a loophole. Do these rules cover a guy walking backwards or perhaps hopping on one foot? Dad snorted, or maybe if he wears a funny hat. I laughed aloud and the guards flinched. One muttered into his radio again, probably calling for backup. I leaned casually against the truck, pretending to be utterly unconcerned, though my stomach was tight with adrenaline. Every second I waited, I was one step closer to either victory or humiliation. I decided to try a more direct approach. I slowly circled around, testing the boundaries. Each time I moved, they shifted slightly, mirroring my steps like a bizarre dance. I noticed how absurd it all looked, two grown men taking this way too seriously and me armed with sarcasm and stubbornness. Dad watched silently, eyes glinting with amusement. You know, when I was your age, I wouldn't have even needed to talk. I'd have walked right past them and they'd have stepped aside, mostly out of fear. I raised an eyebrow, fear or respect for the family farm. He smirked, mostly fear, but today it's complicated. The tension stretched on as we played this strange game. I edged forward, glanced at a side gate. It was unlocked, the padlock barely latched. I raised a finger like a magician revealing the trick. Dad, see that? He nodded subtly. I see it, that gate might just be our golden ticket. Before I could make a move, the guard with the clipboard straightened. Step away, you can't go through there. I laughed louder this time, letting the sound carry across the gravel road. Step away, you can't go through there. Why, is there a secret law I missed? Do you have a scroll hidden in your vest somewhere? Dad chuckled at my antics, and I felt a surge of confidence. The guard's composure was slipping. I could see it in the way one of them glanced nervously at the side gate, and the other kept muttering into his radio like a man unsure how to navigate reality. Still, I didn't want to push too hard. A misstep now could turn this comedy into chaos. I decided to test them with a question instead. Do you have any actual proof that I'm banned? A notice? A signature? Or is this all just made up? Silence. One guard shuffled his feet, the other cleared his throat but said nothing. Bingo, the cracks were showing. I glanced at my dad, who raised his eyebrows. You see what I mean? They're bluffing. You just need to walk in like you own the place. I considered it a bold move. I could step through that gate past these self-proclaimed sentries and reclaim my childhood domain. But part of me hesitated. What if they escalate? What if they call the cops? Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. Relax, I've got this, just follow my lead. Sometimes the rules are more flexible than people think, especially when they're ridiculous. I took a deep breath. My dad had always been the calm one, the thinker, the guy who could solve problems without raising his voice. If anyone could handle two overzealous guards, it was him. I felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. This wasn't just about stepping onto the farm anymore. It was about taking back a part of my life that had been absurdly stolen, proving that stubbornness and a little humor could go a long way. And as we positioned ourselves, side by side in front of the side gate, I realized the next move would either end this ridiculous standoff or escalate it into something even more chaotic. One thing was clear, there was no turning back now. The weekend I had imagined as quiet and simple was about to become one of the most memorable, suspense-filled adventures of my life. The side gate stood before us, slightly ajar, like a secret waiting to be discovered. My dad gave me a look, calm, confident, a little mischievous. All right, he said, time to show these guys that rules are one thing, common sense is another. I raised an eyebrow. Common sense with them, that's like waving a white flag at a hurricane. Dad chuckled. Trust me, it'll work, just follow my lead. I stayed close as he walked up to the guards. I could see them straightening, as if my dad's mere presence made them nervous. And honestly, it did. He had that effect. People always underestimated him until they realized he was more clever than they were. Good afternoon, he began, voice calm, deliberate, polite. I understand you've been stopping my son from accessing the farm. Can you show me the documentation for that? Anything authorizing this ban? The guard with the clipboard opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at his partner like he'd forgotten how to talk. The other muttered something into his radio, probably calling for guidance. I couldn't help a quiet chuckle. Yes, Dad, watch them scramble. Dad continued, completely unbothered. You see, this is my property. There are rules, yes, but they apply logically, not arbitrarily. My son is not only authorized, but he's been here since he could walk. Blocking him makes no sense. It's absurd, frankly. I peeked at the guards. Their confidence was melting. The one with the clipboard shifted from foot to foot, muttering under his breath. The other was glancing around as if hopping the earth would swallow him whole. I stepped forward, adding my own voice. Yeah, I'm just here to enjoy a weekend at my dad's farm. Maybe fix a fence, feed the chickens, breathe some fresh air. Nothing criminal about that. Dad gave me a slight nod, timing, he seemed to say, and then he did something brilliant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the official property deed. See this? He said, holding it up. This proves ownership. And yes, it shows that my son has every right to be here. You can't ban someone from their family's property without a court order, which you don't have. The guard's eyes widened. He glanced at the deed like it was radioactive. I couldn't help but smile, finally some leverage. The other guard muttered into his radio again. This time his tone was shaky. We might need to consult headquarters. Dad smirked. Consulting headquarters is fine, but for now you have no authority to stop him. And if you think you do, I suggest you check your own rulebook carefully before taking any further action. I could feel a strange mix of exhilaration and relief. After all the back and forth, the frustration, the ridiculousness of arguing with men who clearly thought they were farm royalty, we were finally gaining the upper hand. But I didn't let myself relax, not yet. These guys were unpredictable. One guard cleared his throat and tried to assert himself again. Sir, we're just following orders. Dad raised an eyebrow. Orders from whom? And based on what? Because from where I'm standing, your orders are nonsense. My son walks through that gate now, or you'll be responsible for consequences you can't even imagine. I felt a surge of pride. My dad had always been clever, but seeing him dismantle their arrogance with calm words and undeniable evidence, it was exhilarating. I stepped through the gate, feeling like a hero in slow motion. The guards didn't move. One of them opened his mouth, then stopped. The other just stared, completely frozen. I almost laughed out loud. This is it, we're winning. Dad followed me through, calm as ever, and I knew that the tension wasn't entirely gone. They might call reinforcements, escalate the situation, or just sulk and plot their next move. But for now, the farm was ours. My weekend was finally within reach. I looked around, taking a deep breath of that fresh farm air. The smell of hay, the distant moo of cows, the gentle sway of the trees in the wind, it was intoxicating. And yet a tiny spark of caution lingered. I knew this wasn't over, not entirely. Because when dealing with the HOA, especially ones this ridiculous, peace was always temporary. And I had a feeling that the next move, whether it came from them or some other absurd rule, was going to test my patience, my dad's cleverness, and maybe even my sense of humor. But for now, I had stepped onto my dad's farm. Victory felt sweet, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away again. I thought walking through that gate would be the end of the nightmare. I was wrong. No sooner had my boots hit the soft dirt of the farmyard than one of the guards cleared his throat, his voice sharp. "Sir, you're not authorized to enter this section of the property." I froze for a second, glancing at my dad. He gave me a calm, almost mischievous smile. They never learn, do they? I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding, not just from adrenaline, but from the absurdity of arguing with two men over something as ridiculous as this. The field in front of us was wide open, sun glinting off the barn, the chickens clucking as if oblivious to the tension. And yet here we were in a standoff that could have been lifted with a simple, "Oh, sorry, come on in." I decided to push my luck. "You know," I said, voice steady but dripping with sarcasm, "I've been coming here since I could walk. I've fed every animal on this farm, and now apparently I need to submit a written application to enjoy a weekend. I love bureaucracy, but this is ridiculous." The guard with the clipboard fumbled, muttering into his radio. The other one took a cautious step back, clearly realizing that the situation was slipping out of his control. Dad walked closer, calm and deliberate. "Listen, gentlemen," he said, "I understand you're just following rules, but rules are meaningless when they contradict reality. My son is authorized, this is my land, and any further attempts to block him will be, well, let's just say, inconvenient for everyone." One guard straightened, clearly trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "Sir, we have our orders." Orders, again, I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me, part frustration, part disbelief. Orders from who and based on what law? Because last I checked, this isn't a restricted military base. It's a farm, a family farm. They both paused. I could see doubt creeping in. The confidence they had shown earlier was cracking bit by bit. My dad's calm assertiveness was dismantling their rigid structure like a wrecking ball. I stepped closer to the barn, making my presence obvious, and added, "If this is about protocol, then maybe someone should explain what happens when protocol meets common sense. Spoiler alert, common sense usually wins." The guard muttered something under his breath and I caught it. "I didn't sign up for this." I couldn't hold it in. "No one signed up for this, that's the point," I said, voice rising with a mix of frustration and humor. "I just want a weekend on my dad's farm. A weekend, is that so much to ask?" The other guard finally looked directly at my dad, as if pleading for salvation. Dad raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. That small gesture was enough. The guards knew they were cornered. I felt a surge of relief, but the tension didn't leave completely. One wrong word, one misstep, and this could spiral again. I glanced around, the chickens, the tractor, even the old windmill seemed to hold its breath. Then unexpectedly the first guard sighed. "Fine, you can stay, but technically you're still not authorized." I laughed, a real unrestrained laugh. "Technically? Oh, thank you, officer. I'll keep that in mind while I'm feeding the chickens and fixing the fence." Dad smirked. "Technically or not, he's staying." The other guard muttered something else into his radio, probably declaring defeat silently. They shuffled their feet, clearly humiliated, but they didn't make any more threats. They just faded into the background like storm clouds slowly drifting away. I stepped fully onto the farm, letting the sunlight hit my face. Freedom, sweet, absurd freedom. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. "See, told you we had a plan. Sometimes the rules aren't as rigid as people make them out to be." I couldn't stop smiling. "You were right, that was insane but brilliant." For a brief moment, the chaos melted away. Birds chirped, the wind rustled the trees, and I realized how ridiculous it all had been. A weekend that should have been peaceful had turned into a battle of wits against two overzealous guards, and yet we had won. But deep down, I knew this wasn't completely over. HOA rules had a way of sneaking back into your life, and I had a feeling these guys weren't done scheming. Still, for now, victory was ours. I could finally breathe, walk the fields, and reclaim my weekend. And as I looked at my dad standing tall and amused, I felt a mix of pride, relief, and a little excitement for the chaos that might still come. Because if the HOA thought this was the end, they had another thing coming. I thought the worst was over. The guards had backed down, muttering into radios, shuffling awkwardly like kids caught in a lie. My dad and I walked across the gravel toward the barn, thinking the battle had been won. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOAs, it's that rules are like shadows. They creep back when you least expect them. As I reached the barn, one of the guards suddenly straightened and said, "Actually, wait. According to Clause 14B in the HOA regulations, you..." I froze, my dad stopped, two eyes narrowing. Clause 14B, oh no, not this. You mean that ridiculously specific, almost impossible to interpret clause? Dad asked, voice calm but tinged with humor. Do you really think that clause can overrule property ownership and decades of family history? The guard hesitated. He shuffled papers, trying to find the proof in his clipboard. The other guard glanced nervously at me and my dad. Something in their expressions told me they weren't entirely sure they believed what they were reading either. I stepped forward, smiling but tense. Go ahead, show me Clause 14B, let's see what nonsense they've cooked up this time. The guard flipped through the papers and held one up triumphantly. Here it is. It states that anyone deemed a disturbance by HOA security may be restricted from farm access. Dad chuckled, a disturbance, so if my kid walks in and asks questions, that counts? Fascinating logic. I rolled my eyes. You mean walking on my dad's land, breathing the fresh air, maybe feeding a chicken or two, somehow qualifies as a disturbance? The guards flinched. Clearly they knew this was a stretch, and then Dad did something brilliant. He leaned over and read the clause carefully. His eyes twinkled. Interesting, he said. It seems you missed a little detail. For Clause 14B to apply, a disturbance must be repeated and verified by an HOA official in writing. Care to point that out on your documents? The guards exchanged panicked looks. One fumbled with his clipboard. Oh, well, it may be we did. Exactly, Dad interrupted. You didn't, therefore, technically this clause doesn't apply. My son is not a disturbance under the HOA rules. Congratulations, you just declared yourselves wrong. I couldn't help but laugh, relief washing over me. The absurdity of it all, the rules, the guards, the ridiculous attempt to ban me, had finally boomeranged right back at them. One guard muttered something about reporting to superiors, while the other simply slumped, realizing that every argument they had was collapsing under its own weight. I took a step toward the barn, triumphant, and my dad followed, smirking. I felt a surge of pride, not just for reclaiming my weekend, but for watching bureaucracy implode in real time. The HOA rules had been their weapon, but they'd forgotten one key thing: logic, evidence, and a little stubbornness will always win over arbitrary authority. The guards hesitated, then stepped aside, clearly defeated. I could see them calculating exit strategies, trying to preserve some shred of dignity. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. Go on, enjoy the farm, you've earned it. I walked past the side gate and onto the familiar dirt path, the sunlight warm on my face. Everything smelled like freedom, fresh hay, earth, and the faint scent of diesel from the old tractor. The field stretched out before me, calm and inviting. I glanced back at the guards. One waved awkwardly, probably trying to save face. I waved back, smirking. Good luck with Clause 14B, gentlemen. Try not to misuse it again. My dad laughed. Next time, maybe bring a proper barricade, he joked, nudging me. I laughed too. It felt good to finally relax, even as the absurdity of the entire situation lingered in the back of my mind. I walked to the barn, looking at every familiar corner. The tool shed, the hayloft, even the old swing my dad had hung from a tree years ago. It was all still here, untouched by the ridiculousness of the HOA's overreach. I could finally breathe, finally feel at home again. And as I fed the chickens and checked the fences, I realized something important. The fight had been ridiculous, the stakes absurd, but the lesson was clear. Persistence matters, knowing your rights matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, humor and stubbornness can topple even the most overzealous bureaucracy. For a brief moment, I paused, looking across the fields. I knew this wasn't just a story about a weekend on the farm, it was about reclaiming a part of my life that someone tried to take with rules and threats. And the best part, we had done it without losing our sanity too much. I smiled at my dad, so technically we win. He laughed, technically, absolutely. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, casting golden streaks across the fields. For the first time in what felt like hours, maybe even days, I could breathe. The side gate was open, the guards had slunk back to their vehicles, muttering about reporting and paperwork, and my dad and I were finally free to roam the farm without someone questioning our every move. I leaned against the old fence, taking it all in. The smell of fresh hay, the sound of chickens clucking, cows mooing in the distance, and the soft rustle of wind through the trees, it was perfect. Peaceful, home, and all of it mine, or at least my dad's, and now fully mine again. I looked at my dad, smirking. You know, I always thought this place would just welcome me with open arms. Never in a million years did I imagine it would require a full-blown standoff, clause references, and a psychology degree to get here. Dad laughed, shaking his head. You've got to admit, it was entertaining in a ridiculous kind of way, and educational. Some lessons only come with a little chaos. I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, like never underestimate bureaucracy or the ridiculous lengths HOA guards will go to, and maybe always have your dad on speed dial. We walked toward the barn, my dad already picking up tools as if he had every intention of ignoring the absurdity that had just unfolded. I grabbed a bucket to feed the chickens, savoring the simple routine that somehow felt like a victory parade. Every step I took reminded me of what we had fought for, not just access to a farm, but reclaiming a space that was ours, and proving that persistence, logic, and a little humor can defeat even the most overcomplicated rules. I glanced back toward the side gate one last time. The guards' trucks were gone, their radios silent. The papers they had clutched so proudly, their supposed authority rendered meaningless. It was almost poetic. I felt a grin spreading across my face. Victory tastes like fresh air and chicken feed. Dad nudged me, you know what this calls for. More bureaucracy, I teased. He laughed, no lunch and then maybe a tractor ride, you've earned it. As we walked toward the barn, I felt a wave of relief and amusement wash over me. The tension that had gripped my chest all day slowly melted into laughter and gratitude. It had been ridiculous, exhausting, even infuriating, but it had also been unforgettable. I thought about those guards, standing so proudly in their vests, believing that rules could intimidate me. They didn't realize that ownership, family, and stubborn determination are far more powerful than any clipboard or clause could ever be. I looked around the farm at every tree, fence post, and familiar patch of earth. I realized something important. This wasn't just about a weekend or a standoff. It was about taking ownership of what matters, standing your ground, and never letting someone else's rules dictate your life, especially when they're absurd. I fed the chickens, checked the fences, and even threw a small piece of hay at one of the cows, which mooed in acknowledgement. My dad laughed at my antics. You're ridiculous, he said, shaking his head. But I guess that's why we make a good team. I laughed. Yeah, persistence, sarcasm, and a dad who knows how to dismantle overzealous authority. That's our strategy. As the sun set, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not just for reclaiming access to the farm, but for standing my ground, navigating the absurdity, and finally feeling at home in a place that had always been mine. I looked at my dad, smiling. So think they'll try Clause 14B again next weekend? He chuckled, shaking his head. Let them try, we'll be ready. I laughed, feeling the stress of the day finally lift. And in that moment, as the farm settled into the quiet rhythm of evening, I knew one thing for certain. No amount of paperwork, rules, or overzealous guards could ever take away what's yours if you're willing to fight for it. We stayed out in the fields until the stars came out, talking, laughing, and enjoying the simple things. The real treasures of a farm, a family, and a weekend finally reclaimed. And for the first time all day, I felt completely, undeniably free. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.